Cornelius Vanderbilt has been described as an illiterate brute with a short temper who was hated or feared by most people he met, and yet he's also one of the wealthiest men in history, an incredibly shrewd and cunning business magnate who was once the richest man in the world. At the age of just 11 years old, Cornelius dropped out of school and went to work on his father's ferry in New York Harbor, which transported goods across the river. After learning the trade, Cornelius wanted to start his own business doing the same kind of thing, which meant he needed a boat. His mother was a farmer, and while she didn't have a lot of money, she had some savings, which she agreed to loan to her son $100 to be exact, which will be enough for him to buy his own small sailboats. There was one caveat, though, in order for Cornelius to get the loan from his mom. He had to clear an extremely rocky field so that she could farm, and Cornelius had always had an extremely strong work ethic, and so he immediately agreed, but it soon became clear removing so many rocks from the field was going to take too long, so he managed to convince other local kids to help him with the job, and in return, he promised they'd get free rides on his new boats. Together, they cleared the field so his mom gave him $100 loan, and Cornelius bought his first boat at the age of just 16. Cornelius then began transporting both freight and passengers between Staten Island and Manhattan. Of course, there was plenty of competition from other ship owners doing the same thing, but Vanderbilt's strategy was to undercut everyone else and offer the cheapest fares on the markets. He quickly gained a reputation for his reliable and affordable ferry services. And here's the crucial bet after paying him back his mother for the loan. He reinvested all the profits he made back into the business. This meant he soon was able to buy another ship, and then another ship, and then another ship. This is basically the capitalist blueprint for success. You initially live frugally yourself and reinvest all the business profits straight back into more growth, and do this over and over again to build your empire. And because Cornelius worked so relentlessly hard, it wasn't long before he had a whole fleet of ships transporting people and goods across a variety of different routes. People even started nicknaming him the Commodore. But then Cornelius got an even bigger breakthrough with the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain, when the American government gave him a lucrative contract to help transport soldiers on his ships. Somehow, though, despite working such long hours, at the age of 19, Cornelius found time to marry his cousin and later went on to have 13 children. In 1820s, Cornelius had identified how to step his business up to another level: steamboats. He knew the steamboat technology was much more efficient than the ships he'd been using, and so he began investing heavily into buying steamboats instead, and once again used the same tactics that he had for sailboats, initially undercutting every single competitor so that he had the cheaper prices and the stall over customers. At one point, he even started offering some boat trips for free to Cornelius. It didn't matter if he was making a loss on every trip, because his logic was simple. As long as he had more money than its competitors, he could quickly bankrupt them by taking all their customers, and then once they were out of business, he'd raised his own prices to more sustainable levels. These ruthless tactics did indeed bankrupt several other business owners, but in many cases, Cornelius would simply buy their businesses at a reduced price once the ship owners realized they couldn't compete with Cornelius' pricing. There were also a few larger steamboat companies who simply paid Cornelius a lump sum of money to leave the area and not compete on the same trade routes. For example, when Cornelius started operating on the Hudson River, a company called the Steamboat Association, who also operated there, paid him $100,000 to stop operating his ships in their territory. For them, it was cheaper to pay Cornelius off than trying to compete with his low prices. Of course, every time Cornelius got a big payout like this, or he bought out a competitor at a discounted rates, his own fleet just got big unless his power and wealth increased further to Cornelius. Making money was a game, and he was determined to win. However, even as Cornelius, his wealth grew, he would always be considered an outsider by the wealthy elites. His lack of school education didn't help bear either, as Cornelius struggled to write properly, and the way he looked and spoke was certainly not how most of the underclass looked and spoke. But Cornelius used his working-class beginnings to his advantage. He advertised his chips as the people's line, affordable chips for normal, everyday people. But Cornelius was never content with what he had. And in 1949, Cornelius identified his next big moneymaker, the California Gold Rush. Now you may have heard the stat that the people who got the riches during the gold rush were often the people selling the pickaxes. Not that people actually looking for gold, because there were so many people doing that. But if you want to know who got the richest of all from the gold rush, it was the ones transporting people to get there. You see, after gold was discovered in California, literally hundreds of 1,000s of people were traveling there hoping to get rich, the largest mass migration in American history. But California wasn't yet linked to the rest of the country by rail, and Cornelius wanted to cash in on this. So he immediately began offering boat trips to California. Of course, several other people did this too. But where Cornelius differentiated himself is that he found a new route to California via Nicaragua, which was about 600 miles shorter than the route via Panama. Everyone else was using, he agreed, an exclusive deal with the government of Nicaragua. And as a result, Cornelius's trips were faster and cheaper than the competition, and thus he attracted far more customers. As more and more people flocked to the gold rush, it was Cornelius. Cornelius was always looking to the future, and just like he previously identified steamboats, is the next revolutionary technology. Now he was looking at railroads. He realized more and more shipments were happening not by boat, but by train. And so, if he wanted to continue to dominate transportation, that's where he needed to focus. So Cornelius began selling off his fleet of ships, and instead began investing in railroads. No, until Cornelius got involved in the railroad business. There was a huge amount of different railway services that were independently owned. But Cornelius started connecting railroads between different regions and building an interconnected network. He wanted to consolidate all these different railways into one giant railroad empire. And by doing this, he began to build a monopoly in railroad transportation. Of course, as always, Cornelius reinvested most of the profits to buy even more railroads and expand even faster. Before long, he built the largest railroad in the world. Now, in his final years of life, Cornelius did start diverting some of his huge wealth towards philanthropy. For example, he established the Vanderbilt University for $1 million, which at the time was the largest charitable gift in American history. But around this time, Cornelius grew increasingly ill and became bedridden. Despite his weakened state, he was still his usual fiery, aggressive self. For example, when he saw members of the media outside his house to report on his illness, he'd have to be physically restrained after going outside to attack them. But after many months of fighting his illness, Cornelius died in 1877, aged 82. The New York Times announced his death, stating the immediate cause of his death was exhaustion brought on by long suffering from a complication of chronic disorders. At the time of his death, his fortune was worth around $100 million, but adjusting for inflation, that today would have been around $200 billion. It's estimated that on paper, he had around 1/9 of all the American currency in circulation at the time, and yet, despite that, he lived a relatively modest life. He consistently plowed almost all his income and its time into the business. When he died, around 90% of his fortune went to his oldest and favorite son, and then he spent the rest between his other many children, most of which he viewed as weak and undeserving. Cornelius Vanderbilt was clearly a polarizing figure hated by many, but normally with a grudging respect. Even his enemies would have to admit that he drastically improved and expanded transportation, first through sailboats, then steamboats, and eventually railroads. And in the process, he'd helped connect different parts of the country together, allowing for much easier transport of both people and goods, and at an affordable price. In many ways, he shaped the American economy more than any other entrepreneur had before him. So that's it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell, smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next video.